Women are the price to pay for an alliance that is being forged between the male left and the imams. And I'm not going to stand here and let it happen on my watch. And again, if there is a left-wing commentator or an imam or both or any combination of the above, I will take them on single-handedly in a public space and debate them into the ground.
This week, an East London mosque organised a fun run at Victoria Park which excluded women. It was just for men and for children under the age of 12. Is this misogyny, or does this mosque have a right to exercise religious freedom? Well, to discuss this, I'm joined by Khadija Khan. She is a commentator and journalist, and Anna Loutfi, a barrister. Anna and Khadija, thank you so much for joining me on Spectator TV. Now, Khadija, I wanted to ask you first, why has this fun run been seen as so controversial?
Thank you so much for having me to discuss this issue. I mean, it's a very important and concerning issue. People, they might see it as a cultural thing that was done in private setting. However, it is a very concerning matter in regards to women's rights and how women and girls are treated in religiously conservative communities here in Britain. This run was organized by the East London Mosque, and they organized it under the pretext of having an inclusive and friendly and a family event from which women and girls, they were excluded. I mean, it speaks volumes about this place of women in a religiously conservative section within British Muslim communities. So I think we are rightly outraged, but when we say we, it means people who have been talking about, this discernible shift toward conservatism in our society when we talk about, specifically women's right in Islam. Many people on the left, they are quite fine with it. They have relativized it, and they see it as, when they talk about it, they see it as cultural relativism. They try to make sense out of these things by saying that when we can have gentlemen clubs in England, when we can have women-only events here in the UK, why can't we just be fine with a conservative community having an event from which women have been excluded? To which my answer would be that it would be okay if it were a male-only event or a female-only event. I don't have a problem with that. But when you say that specifically girls above 12 years old and women, they are not allowed to run or participate in this event, it is a form of discrimination on the basis of their gender. And I think try to downplay this scorching reality. It's really concerning for our society, because it seems like people who are coming from minority backgrounds, or women specifically, women and girls, they don't deserve any better. I mean, it is okay to just throw them under the bus just to appease religious zealots in our society. And this has been normalized for some time now. We don't seem to have, problem with this kind of attitude.
And before I go on to Anna, Khadija, if it's an East London mosque, they have segregated spaces inside the mosque. It does seem a little bit implausible that should they organise a fun run, it would not be split between men and women. If they did a man's run and a woman's run, would that be okay? Or surely this is how the mosque would organise things.
The mosque, the administrations of the mosque here in the UK, they have been notoriously known, how they have treated their women when it comes to giving them, space in religious setting. I would say this year in Ramadan, some women, when they went to a mosque in Oxford, they were told there is no space for them and they are not invited inside the mosque to break their fast, and they were turned away. I mean, this one example is just, I would say, the tip of the iceberg. how women are treated in these religious settings. So as I said, that if there is an event, when they say it's a male-only event, that's fine. But when specifically they mention that women are excluded and they are not allowed to do it, then of course that is a discrimination against them on the basis of their gender. And broadly speaking, I would say that segregation, we have long, sugar-coated this kind of treatment within certain section of Muslim community. This is gender apartheid that we see in Afghanistan, that we see in Iran, that we see in Saudi Arabia, in other religiously conservative Muslim countries and societies. It is a gender apartheid, and we have to call it out when they segregate women, then when they push women in, dark and, dingy spaces within the premises of mosque. That is unfair, and it is antithetical to everything that British society, British law stand for.
Anna, talking about British law, great time to bring you in. What sort of, when you look at the law, can this mosque get away with causing this sort of segregation? You have the Equality Act, and I believe it says that in some circumstances, single-sex events are allowed to take place.
No, this is, as Khadija says, it's completely antithetical to the law of the land as we have it currently. The Equality Act does not allow people, men, who happen to have authority and standing within certain communities, to decide the law of the land. Imams and religious leaders cannot adapt the Equality Act for their own purposes. The exemptions or exceptions are there to allow women access to single-sex services. We are not speaking about a service. We are speaking, as Khadija said, about an all-inclusive family event. And Khadija made the very important point about the fact that this isn't a private event. That is crucial. And the reason why it's crucial is because when you start to appropriate public spaces, and whether or not a mosque is a public space, I think is up for debate, because a lot goes on within the framework of a mosque, probably using the auspices of a private setting, that if it was considered to be a public setting would engage British law. But let's park the mosque space for one moment. A park paid for by British taxpayers, open and accessible to all residents in an area, is making prescriptions about what women can and cannot do of a certain age. Adult women over the age of 12, they cannot participate in an inclusive event by order of the mosque and the mosque leaders in a public space. This is an appropriation of British public space under the auspices of religious freedom. And it is not anything to do with providing a service to women. Now, you put it to Khadija, Natasha, that, well, what if they had organised a female-only race for Muslim women over the age of 12? Well, I'll eat my hat if that ever happens. I'll eat my wig on camera, because the fact of the matter is this is a very disingenuous debate. What we are looking at is a cultural assumption that the public space is male, and that females in public have either to behave in scripted and hindered ways, primarily symbolized through their covering, but also symbolized through their lack of participation in public life, unless they are children, hence the prescription of women over 12, because women contaminate public space in certain cultural frameworks. They are seen as a contaminating influence. Public space is male. Authority is male. Political authority is male. Now, under British law, the reason why exceptions for sex-specific services are exceptions is because British law operates on a principle of formal equality between the sexes. And that is an absolute fundamental principle of British democratic arrangements. If you want to take issue with those arrangements and say, no, we want to provide a single-sex service in the form of, for example, a women's refuge centre, and we've all heard the debates about single-sex spaces in recent times in relation to the transgender issue, then you have to objectively justify the service that you're providing and why it has to be single-sex, and that objective assessment will be determined by a judge in a court of law. Okay, and it has to be decided on the basis of whether or not it is fulfilling a legitimate aim that is proportionate and compatible with the general principles of a democratic society. Now, we are not looking at women as a vulnerable category in mixed sports, for example, because otherwise girls under 12 would not be welcome to this event. What we're looking at is a open, I would say, provocation. I think this is about testing whether or not religious freedom and religious separatism is going to be allowed a free pass when it comes to the appropriation of British public spaces paid for by the taxpayer to institutionalize on a quasi-legal, informal basis the idea that adult women are not to be seen in public unless they come under certain restrictions that are dictated by religious authorities. And what the British authorities have to do in this situation is give a very robust and clear response to the East London Mosque and say this is not acceptable. And no amount of religious freedom allows it to be acceptable, because under Article 9 of the European Convention on Human Rights, you do not have an unqualified right to religious freedom, because where it's not compatible with formal equality and it's not compatible with democracy, and what you're saying is that women are not to be allowed access to public spaces on the basis of some diktat from some imam, then you are acting contrary to British law. And it is as simple as that. And I have said, and I will continue to say, if there is an imam out there who disagrees with me and would like to take this up in public, and I emphasize in public, in an event that is accessible to all and sundry to hear, I will debate him freely and happily on this issue and any related issue in respect of Islamic religious freedom in Britain and formal sexual equality.
Oh, we would love to host that on Spectator TV.
I won't hold my breath.
Khadija, I wanted to ask you and Anna about Sharia law in Britain. I remember before the election seeing J.D. Vance on a podcast saying that there are certain areas in Britain that operate entirely under Sharia law.
You have definitely communities in the UK where local leaders are running explicitly on Sharia law and winning elections in cities that are in the United Kingdom.
And I thought to myself, that must be an exaggeration. Do you think it is?
Now, if somebody says that Britain is ruled under Sharia law, that is, of course, not true. However, there has been a discerning shift toward a society that is not in policy, but in practice, has been aligned with certain aspects of Sharia compliance. Specifically, when it comes to treat women in certain section of British Muslim communities. And this has been allowed by the concerned authorities, by the politicians, by the liberal, left here in the UK. People who talk about religious freedom, they know that Britain is one of the best places to be or to live for any religious minority, including Muslims. Muslims enjoy far more rights here in Britain than they can ever imagine in Muslim majority countries. I was born and raised in a Muslim majority country, and I can tell you for sure that even Muslims are not given equal rights in Muslim majority states. And in this situation, when some people, they try to assert their religious right in an absolute manner, that is not what British law is all about. It is, that Sharia compliance that we see at play. I don't want to really sit on the fence or try to sugarcoat my word when I'm talking about misogyny in religious context. There is misogyny that stems from Islamic discourse, and there are certain teachings which are highly discriminatory, deeply misogynistic in Quran, in Hadith, and we cannot treat women according to those beliefs in this country. And now we see there are women, they would come, out and, try to rebut my argument by saying that this is our choice to be segregated. This is our choice to be, separated from men and having our own spaces, so-called, women-only spaces in Islamic discourse. However, the reality is that they have been sidelined by Muslim men. They are treated as, second-class citizen inside the home, in society, outside the home, in society, in social and political discourse. Women cannot hold political, office. Women cannot hold a religious office. However, we just refuse to intervene because we see it as an intervention in someone's, personal space. This is not, as Anna said, this is not a personal space when you are organizing an event in a park. That is a public space. And you are showing how you treat your women, when you are treating your women in public space in this way. There was no reason for the mosque to specifically mention that women cannot take part in this event. It could be organized as a male-only event. But we say that they organize such events in religious context. It's important to tell women their place, that they are not welcome in places where men operate, where men dominate. So they have to be, hidden away, either under the folds of clothing, or there are these barriers, constraint, which are like not like physical constraint, but they are constrained. For me, it was shocking to know that this has been going on for so many years. And it's just this year that we are taking, objection with this event. I mean, thankfully we are doing it. But I mean, it's really strange that it never strikes people that it's something which should not be normalized. So that shows discernible shift towards a Sharia compliant society, where we are respecting Sharia laws in practice, not in policy, of course, but in practice. Yeah, this is a distorted and co-opted form of multiculturalism that we have here in the UK, that all cultures are equal. I have said it, I will say it again and again, that all cultures are not equal, especially cultures, any culture or religion that looks down on women or violates women's rights, forfeit its right to our respect. We owe nothing to such beliefs.
Anna, I wanted to ask you about Sharia law as well. You've obviously written a report on it, and I have it here, the Sharia question, which looks at Sharia councils and two-tier justice and the issue of how misogyny takes place in Sharia law. Is it as embedded in society as J.D. Vance suggested?
It is embedded, but you see, the problem is, and I say this in the report, which was commissioned by the Women's Policy Centre, and it's a report that I've just completed called the Sharia Question. And the question part is interesting, which is that there is no Sharia law in the UK. Let's be absolutely clear before everybody descends on me, okay? I'm not stupid. I didn't write a report thinking, I'm going to do a Donald Trump and say, Britain has capitulated to Sharia law. That's an easy, cheap clickbait approach. But what it is it's informal. Sharia is informal. It operates, I would say, quasi-formally within communities that operate informally by the back door. It operates privately. There are private arrangements, private settings, private venues, private contracts, private deals that all operate through Sharia principles, especially when it comes to whole communities, large communities in the UK, in respect of family and marital affairs. Okay, and I deal with that in the report, that when it comes to regulation of the family and particularly the personal status of women, Sharia is totally operative in the United Kingdom. It is just informally so. Now, this is why this run is the East London mosques run is important, because it takes place in a public space. And we can hear arguments about religious freedom, and we can hear arguments about women from Muslim backgrounds who want to see more of this, who totally accept the segregation and the differential treatment. They see it as part and parcel, to coin Sadiq Khan, part and parcel of living in a Muslim community, if you like, in Tower Hamlets or wherever. But Muslim women are not the only people in this country. So even if 100% of women from Muslim backgrounds in Britain today are highly educated, highly literate, highly employed, fully cognizant of how to conduct affairs in English, totally independent, see themselves as, individual, free, willed persons able to make rational choices in a traditional Enlightenment understanding of what rational choice is. It's irrelevant as far as I'm concerned, because Muslim women do not decide the basic principles upon which this country is founded, particularly when it comes to our public spaces. And I see it as extraordinary that we should give the definition of British democracy over to a minority group, whether it's the women from that minority group or the men from that minority group, or both of them. If every single Muslim is aligned completely, which I think is a huge assumption, that it's absolutely acceptable to exclude women from certain public spaces, to exclude women from political decision-making, to exclude women from a certain ability to make representations when it comes to their own divorces and financial settlements and custody of their children. Even if every Muslim is totally aligned with those two-tier values, one rule for men, another rule for women, that doesn't speak for the rest of us. If we are a multicultural society, then the majority get a say, surely, in how public space is perceived. And I'm sorry, but that's where compromise comes in. You may get away with a lot of things in private. And hell, all of us do. I mean, there are a lot of things that are against the law in this country, and there are a lot of private practices that are violations of the law. And the reason why they continue, from casual pot smoking to sexually violent behavior in the bedroom, the reason those practices go on is because they are not public, and therefore nobody ever gets to find out about them, or charges aren't pressed. But when something is public, then the authorities, if they do not come down on it and say this engages the principle of formal equality between the sexes and it is not permissible in a British park, then what they've done, the British authorities, if they have capitulated to the religious minority and they have ceded the park to that religious minority for their own purposes. I'm afraid there's nothing in the European Convention on Human Rights, nothing in the tradition of protecting religious minorities and religious freedoms that allows a minority to dictate to the majority. And where does this go if we're going to go down the slippery slope argument? It goes down to, well, you've allowed us to have this run in a park. Now we're going to do something else. We're going to suggest that actually any woman coming into this park over the age of 12 should be covered. And if she's not covered, then she can't enter the park. By what right does any non-Muslim woman have to object if we allow this argument to pass? It is a slippery slope. And it is how, it is how countries become unstable when you cede certain rights and privileges to minorities who do not share the same interests with the majority population and who are in some ways committed to destabilizing the legal arrangements of the status quo, arrangements which, I might add, have been put through parliamentary processes, which have been scrutinized by Parliament, by elected representatives who can be booted out at the next election, as part of a parliamentary consensus that is built through dialogue and petition and conversation. None of this applies to the edicts that are passed or promulgated from a mosque by an unelected imam or religious leader. These are completely self-appointed political representatives of mini-states within a state. And we cannot allow it. to just go unremarked, because the demands will grow, and they will grow increasingly in a way that does not favour women and girls. And I would just close with a remark about something I heard this morning on the radio. I heard some woke whippersnapper talking to a radio presenter on talk radio this morning, and I do not know the name of him, but I heard this issue come up. And the young gentleman said, it is a private matter for religious minorities to do as they want. Ignoring, of course, the fact that this wasn't conducted in private. This was conducted in public. And he said, if the women of that minority want to, participate in this event on these terms, that is the business of the religious minority. We have religious freedoms in this country, blah, 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 blah. Again, ignoring the fact that this took place in a park. But of course, it didn't just take place in a park. It was expressly advertised as exclusive, that women over 12 could not participate. So the presenter on talk radio asked this gentleman, what would you have done if there had been an express prohibition on homosexuals attending? He said, well, I would take issue with that. And I dropped my breakfast because, of course, I don't know why I dropped my breakfast, because I wasn't surprised, but I sort of was surprised. I was surprised, not surprised, because the left always do this. They are totally indifferent to women. And they always have been. And again, if there's a leftist out there who wants to debate me in public, I can take you back to the writings of Marx and Engels, and we can go and look at the theology of leftism and how it problematizes the very existence of women, and always has done since the inception of modern Marxist thinking. And we saw that in the trans debate, but we see it in this debate too, that when it comes to an express prohibition on homosexuals, the left would be a little bit put out by that, notwithstanding that it's a religious minority that they've just sung the praises of. But when it comes to women, well, you know what? Women are the price to pay for an alliance that is being forged between the male left and the imams. And I'm not going to stand here and let it happen on my watch. And again, if there is a left-wing commentator or an imam or both or any combination of the above, I will take them on single-handedly in a public space and debate them into the ground. And I bet you have no volunteers for that. But I may have to eat my wig.
Watch this space. Khadija and Anna, thank you so much for joining me.